So, okay, there's not much known about this show.
Yeah.
Can you take us into the first episode, or what can you tease? What can fans expect as soon as they enter Castle Rock?
So this first season has a kind of mystery story that unfolds over the course of 10 episodes, and it begins with a kind of spectacular death that leads to the discovery in the bowels of Shawshank Prison of an extra prisoner, and the question of who he is, how he got there, and what his discovery is going to mean for this sort of bedroom community of Castle Rock in the shadow of Shawshank. Those are all questions that get sort of teased out over the course of the season, but his discovery ropes in Andre Holland's character, Henry Deaver, who's a kid who grew up in the town of Castle Rock, a really bad luck town that readers of Stephen King know and love, and it becomes the occasion for Henry's return to Castle Rock, which has a whole bunch of other kind of personal complications.
Can you talk a little bit about what type of scary it will be? Is it creepy, like jump out scares, that sort of thing?
You know, Stephen King is a writer who kind of does it all, and part of what we wanted to do in this show was to deliver on the kind of psychological suspense, the creepiness, and at times the hopefully grab you by the throat scares. And so the early episodes really were building the world of Castle Rock and starting to understand who lives here and who has stayed and who comes back and who tries to escape. And I think that hopefully some of the horrors of being an everyday human are also kind of on the page through the characters.
How involved was Stephen King in, or was he at all?
Well,
Beyond inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, when you're playing in a sandbox as classic and incredible as Stephen King's, I think that, and we're sort of lifelong fans ourselves, and so it was always, we would never have done the show without his full blessing, and so every choice that we made, every character of his that we used, the story that we are using in our first season, he was involved in approving and giving his blessing, and especially when we had character choices or things that happened in the first season that were taking characters of his that in maybe unexpected directions, things that characters he had written about for many years. We really wanted to make sure that we had his full support.
You have other seasons in mind, hopefully?
Yeah, I mean, our fate is in the hands of our corporate masters, so we'll see, but yeah, we would like to keep going.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of Stephen King is like, again, there's so many different kinds of stories that Stephen King tells. Look at the range from the Shawshank Redemption, from Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption to, the Tommyknockers. It's like there's this enormous tent, and so I think we feel like the anthology format is really well suited to a Stephen King show.
If you had to pick like the one greatest challenge of drawing from so many different Stephen King things and weaving them together, what do you think it would be?
For us, it was like restraint, because it's sort of like being at like an all-you-can-eat like buffet dinner on a cruise ship. Like it's very easy to like wind up puking over the side of the boat. Just really sorry, so we had to be selective about where we were drawing characters and where we were drawing on themes and ideas from the books, and so there are a lot of Easter eggs and kind of cross references and footnotes and sidelong winks and at every level in this first season, but we tried by and large to kind of be true to the sort of subgenre that we were emulating in a way. Like we are great fans of the kind of like crime and punishment novels, of Shawshank's a novella, but of Shawshank and Green Mile and a lot of the stories that deal with death row and this sort of real world kind of monster of incarceration, and so that was sort of the sort of subgenre that we were playing with over the course of this first season. So for the most part, the references we chose felt kind of organic to that story.
So the properties you're drawing from are kind of older, and obviously the entertainment landscape was changing a lot in the last couple of years. So what kind of conversations took place about how to bring the show into 2018?
It's a great question. I think part of what we were always intent on doing from the beginning was not telling a kind of like picket fence, old school, where you find Derry at the beginning or where you find Castle Rock at the beginning when you're first introduced to them in novels, but that in fact we wanted to look at what does a town like that look like now, and so all of the choices that we made from sort of a town that had basically been thinned out in its population, to close down storefronts, the mill that had closed down, and now basically, the main business of the town is incarceration. And so that's how sort of you get to Shawshank and understand that there's this real relationship between the prison and the town. I think for us, that was a really big part of kind of thinking about what does a small town in America look like today, and sort of taking those aspects that King has mined so well in small town life and sort of bringing them into 2018.
Yeah, I think it's also it's very easy to because so many of us came to those books when we were, teenagers, or when we were at a very tender age. They're sort of shot through with this contact high of nostalgia, or at least they're for me, and so I associate him with the heyday of some of the great classic books of the 80s and early 90s. But he was always a really contemporary writer at the time, and so part of what was fun and interesting about the challenge of making the show was to try to tell a contemporary Stephen King story. Try to imagine what Shawshank might look like in 2018, what it would look like to tell a story about the privatization of a prison and what the sort of economic pressures on a prison are once a big corporation swallows it up, and and to check in with a character like Alan Pangborn, who's kind of a hero from the novels of the 80s and early 90s, but to meet him at a later point in his life and to bring Scott Glenn in to play him as kind of the aging gunslinger kind of.
What kind of limitations do you have in regards to drawing from his entire body of work?
I mean, as you guys probably know, there have been 1,000 Stephen King adaptations, and so inevitably, when you're talking about a library like that, there are some complexities when it comes to sort of directly adapting the stories. But I think for us, that's actually sort of, we didn't run into that problem nearly in the way that you might think, because we were telling an original story, and so I think everything that we were sort of touching up against, and we were sort of writing this song in the key of Stephen King rather than sort of directly telling the story of the Dark Tower or whatever sort of great book existed before, and that actually wasn't by design. We actually have a huge amount of the library because we're doing the show with Warner Brothers, but it actually was more that we wanted to tell an original story set in the King universe, and so those two sort of complemented each other.
How much of a supernatural element will there be to the show? Is that an underlying? What can you tease?
Well, I guess I'll put it this way. The premise, at least in the first hour or so, is pretty wild and outlandish, but not overtly paranormal. You know what I mean? And then the story gets progressively weirder and more disturbing as it goes. I guess I'd say, one thing that we love about Stephen King is that often you sort of embark on the journey and you think that you're reading one kind of a story, and by the time you arrive at the end, you have lost all of your bearings and you're off in some completely bizarre, alternate place you wouldn't have anticipated. And that was sort of that was a goal for us in making the season.
You guys, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.